How accessible are older games to a modern audience? It's something I've been thinking about a lot lately. Think of the many mechanics and features that have popped up during the past 30 years of video games. For instance, ADS is a standard mechanic in most FPS games, yet it wasn't even made the popular standard until around 2007. Autosave is a feature in practically every game now and just didn't exist in many older titles. Heck, some modern games don't even give you the option to manually save at all. If you're used to a particular mechanic, then go back to an older title where it's non-existent. Is that enough to ruin the experience? The 90s, a decade that is almost 30 years old now, is full of many games that are considered some of the best of all time. How have the games from this decade aged? With thousands of titles readily available at our fingertips and more coming every day, are older titles still worth playing? Well, to try to answer these questions, I decided to play 6 games I've never played before spanning from 1994 to 2000. I wanted to see how easy or difficult it is to play these games in the modern age, as well as talk about their mechanics, their stories, and most importantly, if I truly enjoyed myself. So, without further ado, let's get started. Picture this. You walk into a town and have a friendly chat with the shopkeeper. He tells you a little about the town and some nearby settlements. You thank him. Then someone walks in and begins to shoot. A hitman tried to kill the shopkeeper, Killian, and he's now asking for your help to take out who hired him.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
You walk into his office with a wire and get him to admit his crimes.
That's easy. I want him dead because he cramps my business.
You come back to Killian, tell him the news, then return back to Gizmo. By taking him out, you've rendered the city of Jungtown free from his dirty business and earned some caps yourself. This is just one of the many side quests that are possible in the original Fallout, and one potential option to finish this particular quest. You could have instead sided with Gizmo to make some money and take out Killian. This variety is why I really enjoyed the game. The one goal it gives to you upon starting is to find a water chip.
We're running out of drinking water. No water, no vault.
You first enter a cave and need to clear out these rats. Upon successfully leaving, you find the map screen that allows you to go wherever you like. It gives you a location to start, but on the trip there, a settlement pops up which causes you to think, do I continue to the next vault or make a detour? Thus turning into the rest of the game. It's entirely player driven in the sense that there is no map indicator telling you exactly how to solve a problem or where to go. You have to figure it out purely based on the directions from other NPCs and what you may have already figured out yourself. This game does not hold your hand at all. Combat is difficult. You're pretty badly inaccurate with most things at the start, and if there are more than a couple of enemies, you're probably gonna die.
Your bones are scraped clean by the desolate wind. Your vault will now surely die, as you have.
Combat is turn-based, and every action you do, from moving, shooting, and even, yes, reloading, takes points to do. So you gotta be methodical on how you take your turns with each encounter. I can see many people finding the game unflattering to look at, but I myself liked the UI and design of the characters. However, it was a bit confusing at times due to quite a few characters sharing the same sprite. This made it difficult to figure out who I can actually converse with and advance my quest lines. After talking to the mutant Herald, I didn't even talk to the guy outside his house because I assumed he was unimportant, not realizing that speaking to him was vital to completing a quest. Another thing that I found quite annoying was going up and down any stairs, as well as trying to get into elevators. You had to click the exact right spot in order to get into the elevator, otherwise your character just wouldn't get in. This was also prevalent with ladders. If you didn't click the exact spot, then your character would just tell you you're looking at a ladder. I know it's a ladder. Just go up! Despite the game's shortcomings, it was still a fun experience. I don't think it's inaccessible to modern gamers, but I can see many people having lots of issues with the game. Aside from the visuals, which many may not like, the difficulty level, map structure, and quest design may be too frustrating to deal with for many people. It's a game that requires a lot of patience, and I'm not sure how many people can come back to enjoy it as good as I still believe it to be. Turok has you running around many levels, mowing down many different enemies, and for the first hour, I thought the game was pretty boring. Run around, shoot a dinosaur, run around, shoot a military guy, run around, shoot a giant. Oh, and don't forget the keys. The enemies weren't all that difficult and just felt like cannon fodder. But when I got to the third level, it's like everything changed. This is when things began to pick up. The enemies were suddenly more accurate. You run through an entire city. There's a stressful parkour area that led me to die so many times, and just when I thought the level was done, it culminated into a sudden boss battle. From here on out, the game just kept getting crazier. It had me excited to see what else it had to offer. There were so many different enemy types and weapons that continued to be introduced throughout the rest of the game. You go from fighting dinosaurs and soldiers to mechs and robots and aliens seemingly out of nowhere. You fight a giant praying mantis, and then later a fire-breathing T-Rex. Every new weapon and enemy just kept getting me excited. It was very fun. I will say though, that the controls felt a bit odd. I'm not sure if it's just a keyboard and mouse thing, but it was a bit difficult to get used to the controls. I felt a bit disoriented when first playing the game, and the parkour section seemed more difficult than I imagined it would be on a controller. The somewhat janky shooting mechanics were relatively easy to get used to, but the movement never really felt right. Towards the end of the game, the weapons became difficult to sift through due to the sheer amount there were, but it didn't take away from the experience much, if at all. I think this game has surprisingly aged pretty well. Certain aspects of it may be off-putting to modern audiences, such as the aiming system and or the various puzzles, but I don't think there is anything particularly difficult about the game. Ultimately, it's a matter of taste, as these classic FPS games are quite different from modern titles and will require a bit of adjusting to. I struggled with this game. I tried my best to enjoy it, but as I kept playing, I just became more annoyed. First off, it actually hurts to play. I don't know why, but whenever I came across corners, my eyes would actually begin to hurt, and it was a pretty consistent experience. This may be one of the biggest reasons why I didn't enjoy the game, but aside from that, it would have to be the level design. The maze-like layouts were confusing. Irritatingly confusing. I got lost quite a few times in this first level, and as I continued on, the puzzles began to also irritate me. When I got to this level, any enjoyment I had was ruined. This one section has you needing to get into this doorway on the wall. In this game, there is no jump button, so when you go off edges, you kind of float or air run. So what you're supposed to do is time these pillars correctly so that you can float into the doorway, but not wait too long or they'll crush you. After, you gotta climb down these steps and press this series of buttons and run all the way back to the beginning, which I couldn't even figure out immediately because as far as I knew, there was no indication that this would activate something at the beginning. Anyway, you go back to the start because a pillar starts to slowly move towards the ceiling. You need to get on and air run into this other doorway, but if you wait too long, it crushes you and can potentially kill you, making you have to start all of this over from your last save point. It annoyed me so much that it put me into a bad mood for the rest of the level, because it doesn't even end when you get into the doorway. You gotta fight some of the aliens, and I died once, making me have to do it all over again, and it just made me angry. I kept playing a few levels after this, but I just wasn't having fun, which is ultimately why I stopped. The weapons felt pretty good to use, and the enemy variety kept things interesting, but I really think the puzzles and maze-like structure of each level actually drained any enjoyment I had from the game, let alone my physical eye pain. I was interested in the story, and having just started to play the Halo series for the first time, I wanted to see what Bungie did before them, but maybe it just wasn't for me. I don't think the game itself is all that difficult, but the layout of some of the levels and certain puzzles are just frustrating. I'm not really sure how many people would enjoy this if you weren't already a fan of classic FPS. Now, the music though? I hope that the new marathon game Bungie is making successfully brings the series back for a modern audience, because I can only imagine how groundbreaking this game must have been for its time. But at this time, it obviously isn't anymore. Since I was little, I dreamt of leading my own battalion of ships into giant battles. This was the game that finally let me do that. Homeworld has got to be one of the best RTS games I've ever played. This game is special. I saw nothing but ships the entire time, yet I felt the weight of every battle I partook in throughout the campaign. It's explained that you are the last of your species finding a planet to live on. There's a mission where cryopods are being destroyed, and I remember feeling so sad whenever one blew up, as I was told that millions of people were on each one. I was fighting for the existence of my species. The controls of each ship were relatively easy to get the hang of, and formations offer many ways to change your tactics. The AI was smart. It constantly targeted the most important ships in my fleet, whether that be salvage corvettes or repair ships. On multiple occasions, it attempted to flank me whenever possible. The missions in the campaign were dynamic and added a new challenge every time, like this one mission that required you to fly through these nebula fields in order to not take radiation damage. It completely changes your tactics and requires you to not only move much more carefully, but renders you basically unable to mine any resources for more ships, so you have to be careful with what you send out. The major mechanical element that sets this game apart from other space RTS games is that the map is in 3D. This means that you actually can move your ships up or below certain areas. It's not just straight like every other RTS. If you don't have a scout or a probe ship, an enemy could essentially flank you by surprise, attacking from above or below without realizing until it's too late. This is how I would imagine spaceship combat to actually work, and I'm surprised that as far as I know, no other RTS games have used this mechanic before. Unfortunately though, as you could probably tell, I played the remastered version of the game. This is because when I decided to play the game, Gearbox released an update that quite literally rendered the original unplayable. Aside from having issues even recording the game, when I tried to play it, this happened.
The research division is online. Begin fighter chassis research.
Thankfully, I think the issue has since been fixed, but it was completely unplayable for the longest time. The main changes in the remaster, besides the graphical and UI overhaul, is that the fighters no longer have to refuel. Originally, they had to go to frigates or board capital ships in order to refuel, but it's been removed. This is a wonderful remaster that just makes the game easier on the eyes. I think it's definitely worth playing, and since the new one doesn't seem to be regarded so highly, I think it's a fantastic time to go back and try out this wonderful gem.
Were made by a cabal of technophiles so crazed for power that they would control not only governments and people, but the chemistry of our bodies as well.
You will soon have your God, and you will make it with your own hands.
Human beings may not be perfect, but a computer program with language synthesis is hardly the answer to the world's problems.
Why contain it? Let it spill over into the schools and churches. Let the bodies pile up in the streets. In the end, they'll beg us to save them.
Some people just don't understand the dangers of indiscriminate surveillance.
Deus Ex is widely regarded as one of the best games of all time, and with good reason. I talked about it a small amount in my last video, but I really only mentioned a problem I had with the AI and how weapon accuracy works. While yes, I still have problems with them, it didn't take away the enjoyment I had playing the game. Deus Ex gives you a lot of freedom to choose how to complete each level, from sneaking around and taking people out non-lethally, to hacking your way into computer systems to access areas, or destroying turrets with grenades, and even just going balls to the wall with explosions everywhere and heavy weapons, tanking as much damage as possible. But the real core of the game is finding out the conspiracy-fueled story that you are the center of. You travel throughout many cities, but when you get to Hong Kong, everything changes. The story reaches its second act, and the world you once knew is flipped on its head, so you need to figure out what's really going on. It's such an engaging story all the way through, and I think has a satisfying conclusion no matter what ending you choose. This game truly is one of the best of all time, and I hope more people get the opportunity to play it if they haven't. Unfortunately, the game is nowhere near accessible in its current state. I had to jump through so many hoops just to get the game to work correctly. When I first booted it up, for some reason, it was ridiculously fast and the dialogue would not finish correctly. So I looked it up and found out that the game's speed was tied to FPS, so since I was running at who knows how high, it was about 3 times as fast as normal. So I needed to download a fan mod that changes the launcher and also runs the game with the older 3D graphics. Honestly, I don't know how it works, but the game now ran as intended. Or so I thought, because whenever I pressed the inventory button, it would take 10 seconds to load up. So I looked it up, and apparently the FPS isn't properly working in the fan mod as intended. So I had to manually limit the FPS on my system settings, and finally, the game worked as intended. I find it absolutely ridiculous that I had to jump through this many hoops just to get the game to work correctly. I was completely unaware that modern hardware makes older games practically unplayable without updates until now. Anyone can buy the game on Steam and run into the exact same issue I did when they start playing. This one barrier may be enough to turn people away from even playing the game in the first place. It should not need to rely on a fan mod that itself has issues in order to run properly. It's really a shame because this kind of accessibility issue is exactly what prevents people from playing older games. This game is so good, and it annoys me that this blatant issue may be preventing people from playing the game. But if you haven't, please try it, because it isn't called one of the best games of all time for nothing. This game changed FPS forever. I still can't believe that it was made in 1998. It feels refined even by today's standards. The weapon variety is immense. There's swaths of different enemy types throughout, and each level introduced a unique layer that expanded the game every time. However, it was way more difficult than I imagined. There were a handful of times where I kept dying and dying and dying and dying, just trying to get through certain areas. Health regeneration stations are pretty scarce, so you gotta hope that you can survive most encounters with a lot of health, or you're gonna be having a rough time. The one thing I want to say that disappointed me the most is that none of my questions were answered. Why is the Black Mesa facility being destroyed? Why was I being hunted? Why was everything in the facility kill on sight? Who even ordered this? Who the hell is this guy? What the hell is this thing? Maybe I just gotta play the sequel to get the answers to my questions. But man, I was just hoping for some sort of answer to anything. My assumption is that the Black Mesa facility was experimenting with some sort of interdimensional travel that led to the alien life breaking the system and roaming around the facility. Potentially, this guy might have sabotaged the systems intentionally, and some yet-to-be-seen figure ordered Mesa to be shut down, no questions asked. Is that actually what happened? No clue, can't tell you, but maybe I'm, somewhere in the right direction. The textures are badly dated in a way that made the game unintentionally confusing for me at the beginning. They're somewhat low-res, and a part of me is conditioned to think, okay, interactable items are slightly higher resolution, and the rest is lower, but this is just not true. Everything is the same resolution, which made certain interactable items difficult for me to figure out. This might just be a personal problem, but it did cause me to walk around a lot more than I needed to at the beginning of the game, before I just started trying to touch everything. I definitely recommend the game to anyone who seems interested. It still feels great today, and if graphics are that much of a deal breaker for you, then there's an entire remake called Black Mesa that you can check out. Overall, this experience taught me a lot more than I initially anticipated. Some of these games became my favorites of all time. I'm not sure if I would have ever played most of these games if I didn't make this video, and that's kind of a shame. There's a wealth of great games from an aging past that I think a lot of people would still enjoy. It may take more adjustment than a newer title, but I think that a lot of them provide well-rounded experiences that many would enjoy. Plus, it's enlightening to go back and learn where some game mechanics and genres got their start. I completely understand why many people desire remasters of older titles, because whether it's your desire for the game to visually look much more appealing or not, the unfortunate reality is that many games aren't being ported to newer hardware and are completely being lost to time. According to the Video Game History Foundation study, 87% of classic video games released in the United States are critically endangered. What this means is that there are giant hurdles to play a lot of older games, so much so that it's nigh impossible to play certain titles without pirating them. It's quite a shocking figure, and it's a shame. There are so many games that have and will continue to stand the test of time, but they might also be lost to it. Great gameplay makes games last. Street Fighter Third Strike, which came out in 1999, is still being played by thousands of people. It was just played at this year's EVO, the World Cup of fighting games, with hundreds of players attending and thousands watching online. Great gameplay makes games last. I chose to play games that some would never even touch. I had a great time playing most of them, and I will look back on my time spent with them fondly. Some of these games are quite a bit difficult to come back to, but I think the effort is worthwhile. They definitely are not for everyone, but I don't think that older games should scare you. There are tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of games out there, and your new favorite might be in the place you'd least expect.